Welcome to today's webinar of the Gerhard Center webinar series, The Aftermath of COVID-19, the New Social Impact Ecosystem. Today, we are honored to have with us Bruno Roche to speak about the economics of mutuality. The economics of mutuality is a groundbreaking management innovation based on 15 years of in-depth academic research and business practice. It empowers companies to adopt a reasonable and more complete form of capitalism that is fairer and perform better than the purely financial version operating today. One of the interesting things about it also is that it's actually a collaboration between Mars and the Said Business School at Oxford University. You might remember back in June 16th, we have Colin Mayer. He was talking about similar concept, more or less the same. I mean, he talked about the concept of purpose, and he talked about economics of mutuality. Now, Bruno Roche is the founder and the leader of the economics of mutuality. He served as the chief economist at Mars Incorporated between 2006 and 2020. In that position, he led Catalyst, which is a group thought leadership capability and internal corporate think tank to Mars, which is basically was the lab for the economics of mutuality of 2006, recognizing its potential to reshape the landscape of business, finance, and management education. Mars endorsed Bruno to redeploy the economics of mutuality as a structurally independent public interest foundation with a management consultancy arm, able to grow beyond the boundaries of one company. Today, he leads the economics of mutuality globally from Geneva, Switzerland, with the support of Mars as a key partner. Now, without much ado, Bruno, thank you for joining us. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Ali. Thank you very much for hosting me in this webinar series. It's a great honor to address to all of you. I think we are like 80, 90 people. So warm greetings from Geneva to Egypt. And actually, my wife actually is traveling to Egypt next week, actually. So she will have the privilege of being with you physically, while I have the privilege of being with you virtually. I thank you, Ali, for mentioning the work that has been presented by my dear colleague and friend, Colin Mayer. Colin is a professor at Oxford, and we've been working on these topics of economics of mutuality for the last almost decade now. And it was a wonderful collaboration between business, Mars, where I used to work, and also with Oxford University. And the title of my speech tonight is Completing Capitalism, Heal Business to Heal the World. And behind this topic, we are talking about the fact that capitalism is incomplete. And therefore, because it is incomplete, it's actually harming the world. It's harming society. It's also harming the environment. And the role of business in capitalism has become incredibly important. So in a sense, because capitalism is incomplete and dysfunctional, has become dysfunctional, there is a need, we see the need actually to heal business, even if it sounds like a little bit medical. But as we heal business, we believe actually that we can heal the world. So let's look back for the last 50 years. I mean, in the last 50 years, the world has changed dramatically. But the first form of change is that 50 years ago, money was scarce. Financial capital was scarce. And natural resources, for instance, were abundant. Today, it's just the opposite. Money has become overly abundant to the extent we have negative interest rates, while natural capital and social capital actually have become really scarce in the form of natural environment degradation, but also the increase of inequality. And you know, when we teach economics, and I know I'm talking to a group of distinguished economists, you know, one of the definitions of economics is that it's all about the management of scarcities. 50 years, financial capital was scarce. Today, financial capital is overly abundant. 50 years ago, natural and social human capital were overly abundant. Today, they are overly scarce. Yet, the economic model hasn't changed. So there is a real need to adjust our economic model and to address this new form of scarcities. The second big change that took place about 50 years, that 50 years ago, companies, business were of relative modest size in comparison to nation states. Today, it's just the opposite. And here I have a statistic which shows that out of the 100 top economies in the world, 69 are multinational corporations, which means actually that business have become much bigger in terms of size, influence than 50 years ago. And it means actually that they have become the natural actors of change for the economic model that needs to adjust. The third change is a passage from an economy which is based on the industry and the services to economy based on knowledge, based and powered by digital technology. And what is remarkable in that from the passage from an industrial economy and service economy to a knowledge economy, the nature of the capital intensity has changed dramatically. Service and the industrial economy are financial capital intensive. You need a lot of money to build an industry. You need a lot of money to build a bank or an insurance company. You don't need a lot of money to build a company like Facebook or WhatsApp or Google. So the nature of the business also is drifting away from the notion of the need for financial capital. And of course, the last crisis that we went through, which is a kind of a black swan event, which actually shows that it is going to precipitate and accelerate the change to a new form of value creation. And actually these days, about 90% of the business, of the people working in business are convinced that this crisis will fundamentally change the way we do business over the next 5 years. So is this COVID crisis an opportunity for change? I mean, it's remarkable to see that actually that the COVID has changed the way we work, the way we interact with each other, the way we see also certain jobs. I mean, it is remarkable to see actually that it's not the investment bankers that actually saved the world. It was actually the ordinary people, it was the government, it was the teachers. So this crisis actually is showing actually where we are in terms of value creation and what jobs really matter. And actually, I'm choosing like two different quotes. A quote coming from China, which actually say that crisis has two characters. It's a time of danger, but it's also a time of opportunity. And more recently and closer to where you live, there is this old saying that from the King Solomon, who said that there is a time for everything and a time for every season under heaven, a time to break down and a time to build up. So it's remarkable also to see that the integration of social goals has become much more important in the last 20 years. And these days it is called stakeholder capitalism, and it's accelerating in the way people see value creation. It's visible at the level of companies, investors, it's also visible at the level of consumers and public opinion, and it's also visible at the level of the employees. For instance, today, about 40% of the worldwide assets are managed by ESG type of investors, which actually a shift from a vast majority of funds towards a more responsible form of investment. In the US, for instance, 58% of the rich millennials under 30-year-old believe their wealth will enable them to help their communities. And at the level of the employees, 80% of the 13 to 25-year-old young people want to work for a company that cares about how the company contributes to society and the environment. These are actually long-term trends that will not reverse. And the conversation actually has been impacted in boardrooms, and it has moved from on the questions of acting in a responsible way, a duty at a cost or an opportunity at a profit. And here we are showing the different forms of schools of thought that exist in that space, from the enterprise focus, which is all about proving companies' commitment to societal and environmental issues. And it's more the area of CSR and reputation management and kind of reporting, ESG type of reporting. Then you have another type of of strategy, which is all about improving society and the environment conditions, but most likely, very often at the periphery of where the business operates. And this is the space for the corporate social responsibility. And then there is more recently a type of new form of thinking, which is all about recasting business performance with the purpose as a core, as a way to have both impact on society, but also to boost performance at the level of a business unit. But still today, purpose-driven organizations are rare in business communities. I mean, if you look at it, 93% of Fortune 500 CEOs believe that companies should not mainly focus on making profit, but also integrate social goals. But only 26% of managers and employees believe their organizations have a purpose statement that drives impact. So we are probably at a very interesting and strategic crossroad, and we can take it as an opportunity or a duty to change. And it will impact business leaders, investors, management schools and yours, like the one you are studying in, and policymakers to reposition the corporation positively in ways that reflect the changing needs of society and the planet. And essentially, the core message that I like to communicate to you is that it's really time now, and we have a duty and opportunity to reset business on the right bedrock foundation of practical applications, and not just on what we call here the shifting sense of unfulfilled promises. And the management innovation now exists to empower companies to overperform by meeting the needs of the world. And it starts with a purpose. And the purpose is not a communication exercise. It is probably the most important strategic asset that you have as a company. And the way we define purpose with Colin Mayer is that purpose of business is not to make profit, but it is to produce profitable and scalable solutions to the problems of people and the planet, not profiting from creating problems for people and the planet. And this management innovation that we called the Economics of Mutuality is built on a unique collaboration that between Mars, the company that makes M&Ms and sneakers, but also academic research, like in this case, it was Oxford University. It is focused on purpose-driven transformation at the core of the business, and it empowers holistic approach to perform across non-financial and financial capital. And it is based on highly practical methodology and tools. And perhaps the most distinctive feature of this innovation is that it is designed to engage the finance function as the driving force of innovation. So it's a step-by-step methodology to put purpose into practice. And it starts with what we called in the West a Copernic revolution, which is, it is not a company that is at the center of the ecosystem, it is a purpose. And the purpose, remember, is being defined as developing profitable and scalable solution to the problems of people and planet. Once this Copernic revolution is established, then we propose to map the ecosystem and to identify the stakeholders in the ecosystem that are material to the purpose of the company. And through the exercise, we identify the pain point and the capabilities that actually are prevailing in the ecosystem, which lead to intervention designs to fix these issues. And these intervention designs are meant to fix these issues, which could be of a natural capital type or social or human capital type or shared financial capital type, in such a way that it boosts the innovation of the company by providing a higher level of return, financial return. And then the last bit is, of course, to measure the impact of these interventions on a number of capital. And here we come with two innovations. The first one is that, business needs obviously financial capital to operate. We need money from the bank, we need money from the investors, we need money to operate. And actually, the investors and the bank expect a return from the investment that they made. But companies also need other form of capital to operate. We need natural capital, which is the land that provides, and it is the input flow of natural resources used across the entire value chain of a product. But we also need human and social capital, the people side of it. And the people, it is the people who transform and create value. And it is the relationships among people that actually ensure the cohesion of the organization. And these two forms of capital are critically important also to drive value creation. And of course, there is this element of shared financial capital, which I already mentioned. So our argument is that a company that only invests, that only is managing the financial capital, and that only does it for the benefit of one shareholder, one stakeholder, which is a shareholder, that company is underperforming, is performing below its optimum performance. And we have now 15 years of experience and case studies and tests to show that companies that apply this management innovation, starting from the purpose, building the ecosystem around it, identifying the pain point across different forms of capital, designing interventions to solve them, and measuring impact according to different forms of capital, and eventually proposing a new form of profit construction, which is all about internalizing the positive and negative externalities. That kind of business is not only more impactful in terms of its impact on society and the environment, but it's also more performant than a business that does not apply this management innovation. And here I give you an example of a recent case study that we've done with a retailer in Europe. It's a specialty retailer which is specialized in selling tools for the house. And we found actually that there is an incredible high level of causality and correlation between the social, human, and natural capital that exists in the ecosystem of these shops with performance. In other words, a shop manager, a general manager of a shop that intentionally invests in building social, human, and financial capital in its ecosystem, which is made actually of a real connection with customer, with suppliers, with jobbers, with insurance and banks, with local government, actually outperform. So there is a real business benefit in investing in this kind of non-financial capital in the ecosystem in which we operate. So we've built this management innovation on almost 15 years now of research with Oxford and a number of other companies, but also with Mars. And we just relocated to Geneva in order to run this innovation in the form of a foundation together with academic institutions, but also with businesses. We are partnering with universities around the world, and we have a presence in the US, in Europe, in Africa, and also now in China. And if you want to know more about it, we wrote a series of books. So you will recognize actually the book of my colleague Colin Mayer called Prosperity, and also a book that we completed a couple of years ago called Completing Capitalism, which has been translated also in Chinese a couple of years ago. And together with Colin, we are about to release a new book called How to Put Purpose into Practice, The Economics of Mutuality. That book will be released in January, I believe, by Oxford University Press. There is also a website if you want to find additional information. We have more than 30 publications. We have more than 10 academic partnership with institutions. We have more than 50 case studies now, and we are set up to bring this movement to life across the world. So I'm really grateful to you, Ali, for your invitation. And I hope actually that this presentation of the Economics of Mutuality is going to spur interest and inspire your students. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bruno. Thanks a lot. I have few comments, few questions. I mean, one of the things that many people would react to what he said is that yes, there are some companies that will understand and will practice the economics of mutuality right from their own inner motives. But the majority, you'll have to consider the role of government. You have to consider the community, the civic society, the behavior of, I'm talking about an ecosystem and a governance of a total ecosystem, including government and community, society, civic society, in addition to business. So the majority, I mean, for it to be like a mass scale movement, you really have to look at the whole ecosystem governance kind of a mindset. Is that a correct statement, or is that an extreme view of things?
No, it is a correct statement, but it depends in which geography. For instance, in China, not considering government is just impossible. Any business activities has to take into account the role of government and local government in particular. In the US, the role of government is actually less important. And in Europe, and probably also in the Middle East, the role of government is critically important. So again, we need to be clear about the purpose of the business. And I'll give you an example. For instance, there is a company called Novo Nordisk. Novo Nordisk is a large pharmaceutical company that is specialized in the production and the distribution of insulin, which is medication designed to treat diabetes. A few years ago, they asked themselves, what is the purpose? Is the purpose to sell more insulin to eventually cure more people? That was one option. The other option was, is the purpose of Novo Nordisk, is it to eradicate diabetes? And if you are in the business of selling more insulin, you are not in the same business as if you are in the business of eradicating diabetes. And they chose very boldly, very courageously, that their purpose as a business should be to eradicate diabetes. And the interesting bit is that essentially the purpose here is to solve some of the health problem. It's not a big concept or complex idea. It's about understanding the usefulness of your business to other people. And once you are clear about this, then you need stakeholders, because alone, no one can solve diabetes alone. I mean, of course, Novo Nordisk, as an insulin producer, is part of the solution. But you also need to bring other players, like government, like cities, like water companies, like sport organizations, like nutritionists. Okay, so there is a whole ecosystem of players that are relevant to fulfilling the purpose of eradicating diabetes. And the interesting thing is that this kind of systemic change that can happen around the purpose is actually a way for the company that initiates that transformation and that eventually is responsible for orchestrating the different stakeholders around the purpose, is a form of innovation that put the company in a very strong position in terms of performance, because they are essentially shaping the market in which they operate, but also in terms of resilience. So it is a long response to your questions, Ali, but you're right in the sense that this kind of innovation requires an ecosystem of players in which sometimes, but not always, government play a role. There is also another ecosystem player. It is the universities. Universities are critically important players to train the next generation of business leaders. If people are not informed or not trained, they will not actually be empowered to bring about this innovation. So the core idea here is that, yes, business can be purpose-centric. In order to be purpose-centric, they need to orchestrate and organize a coalition of stakeholders. And that coalition of stakeholders is a form of innovation that increases impacts and also that increases performance. And this can work on for a large business like Novo Nordisk, but it can also start for a very small type of micro-entrepreneurship business. It is a rule that actually applies across the board.
It's interesting that you've mentioned Novo Nordisk and even Mars. When you look, it's interesting that there is a huge impact of the nature of ownership of the company. Mars, for example, is a family business, and the family has this mutuality mindset from the very beginning. And Novo Nordisk is owned by a trust. So they are not really, to a large extent, slaves of the stock market and the stockholders' pressure for financial returns. Now, is it that when you look at some companies that are applying the concept, are they mostly have a special ownership structure, or do they tend to go across the spectrum?
Historically, I think you're right, Ali, because there was, until recently, actually, this implicit rule that the role of business, purpose of business, is to maximize profit for shareholder. So if the shareholder are greedy, then eventually the whole business has to deliver a greedy agenda. If the shareholder are more long-term thinking, or more like in the case of Novo Nordisk, are held by a trust, which actually have a different purpose, then eventually the purpose of business becomes less financial profit for shareholder, but more aligned with a parent company. Could be with the parent organization, could be a family, for instance, or it could be a trust or a foundation. I think this notion is changing, because now there is the growing perception that companies have to mitigate their risk, and if they want to keep their license to operate, they need to address some social and environmental issues. If they don't do it, the government will intervene through taxes, or the public would intervene through boycott of the product or through bad reputation, and they would eventually not have the type of talent they require to operate effectively. So there is an element of risk mitigation, and that agenda of purpose is actually at the moment mostly seen through the eyes of risk mitigation. So the agenda is changing, even for publicly traded companies. I'm thinking, for instance, of a French company called Danone, for instance, and it's entirely publicly traded, and they are actually, to some extent, even more advanced than Mars or than Novo Nordisk on some issues regarding the responsible behavior of business. But that's one thing. The other thing that we observe now, and I really believe the COVID crisis is going to increase this transition, is that companies understand that purpose, and actually purposeful value creation, is the next frontier for value creation. So the value extraction model that has been the rule over the last 50 years, which essentially is the Milton Friedman doctrine, is coming to an end. And it is driven by what I said at the beginning of our presentation, that it's driven by macroeconomic principle, that economics is all about managing scarcities. So saying that financial capital is overly abundant, and that social, natural, and human capital are now becoming scarce, and that the model will have to adjust to this new form of scarcities, it's not an ideology. It is just the observation of something logical. My hope is that the transition will happen through research, education, and not through civil wars or catastrophic events, but it will happen. But there is a growing number of business leaders that also see that this is a new frontier for performance. And that if they don't do this, if they don't embark on this kind of management innovation, not only their business will, they will expose their business to a high level of risk, but they will also expose their business to a missed opportunity. And there is a growing number of companies that actually understand this. And I hope actually that even through this webinar, the future business leaders will understand that the model of shareholder primacy is outdated, dysfunctional, and suboptimum even for the shareholder. So I see this movement taking place. You're right, actually, that it started. I mean, I don't think actually I could have done this research and project in a publicly traded company because I needed to work in a company that was conducive for this kind of research. But nowadays, I think actually it's becoming much more mainstream in economic model. And actually, to my great surprise, my biggest partner and clients at the moment are private equity funds. So companies that want to invest in companies to increase their level to maintain their level of financial return, but in a way that is actually responsible, in such a way that it would increase in return the return on investment. So finance was a source of the problem in this model, and therefore finance could also be a solution to the issue that we are facing.
Let me take some questions from the audience. I'll let each one sort of. So I'm going to start with Damiana. Please unmute yourself.
Sure.
Can you turn the video also?
Yes. Hold on a second. Yes, please.
We're all good.
Hello.
Can you hear me and see me?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, bonsoir, Bruno. I'll stick with English for the rest of the question because not all of our colleagues maybe understand French. I'm the associate chair of the economics department here at AUC right now. And so my question to you is a bit more technical, maybe. I was wondering, how exactly do you measure and identify the company's investments in social capital? We know how it functions with financial capital, but how do you do that for social capital? And also, how do you measure the contribution of those investments then to the company's performance?
So two excellent questions, Daniela. Thank you very much. So the principle that we applied is that we wanted to measure. First of all, we had to make a split between human capital and social capital, because human capital is all about the individual, and the social capital is all about the quality of relationships between people, between individuals. And we had to make the split between these two dimensions because depending on the culture in which you operate, some cultures are much more individualistic, like in the US and Europe, and some cultures are much more community-focused, community-centric, like in China, and also probably also in the Middle East. So the notion that you need both, you need skills and talent, but also you need relationship is critically important. So how we measure that? And so we started from a long list of potential variables that actually could explain the how you measure social capital. And we eventually identified three variables that explains 80% of the social capital that we observed across different business situations. And these three variables are trust, social cohesion, and the capacity for collective actions. And these three variables are easily measurable through surveys and questionnaires in the community in which you operate. And we also found that these three variables not only explain 80% of the in a sense, the social capital that we need to operate in the business, but they also are correlated with economic performance. So therefore, ecosystems which are rich in terms of social capital happen to perform much better in terms of financial performance. So as a company, you have to develop interventions that would grow the social capital in order to get a higher level of financial performance. That's how we operate, okay? So, and we have developed a methodology to actually, because you don't measure trust in Egypt the way you measure trust in Kenya or you measure trust in the US, for instance. So there are some calibration, but it is something that's already happened on finance. For instance, in Europe, we do business in euros. In Switzerland, we do business in Swiss francs. In the US, we do business in dollar, and in Egypt, we do business in pound. And therefore, you have you have a local currency, which actually corresponds to kind of a purchasing power parity. The same happens with social and human capital. So that's the way we do. And if you want to know more, actually, you can really go on my website, because you have a clear description of how we came up to this definition of social, human, natural capital. So we have 3 variables for social capital. We have 5 variables for human capital. One of them is actually what we call the PRUM effect, which is a prospect of upward mobility. So giving people a chance to grow in the organization is really a way actually to create some energy and some human capital. And again, this is correlated with financial performance. And we have 5 natural capital assets for the environment. So essentially, we have like a 15, 16 type of meta variable, which actually are used to measure the quality of the intervention of the company on specific issues. The last bit we do is that we bring this into what we call a mutual profit. So the mutual profit is a new form, is a new construct for profits, because so something I didn't mention, but the project started with a question from the company, from the board of the company, that asked what should be the right level of profit for a company like Mars. And that question was not asked in the context of we should do more profit or we should do less profit. It was in the context of, what is the level of profits that would maximize the performance of our business? So therefore, through this concept of mutual P&L, which is essentially a single bottom line that brings together the positive and the negative externalities that the company creates. Because as a business, you can actually have a negative impact, but you can also have a positive impact. So therefore, in the way you are measuring your profit, you need to take into account both the negative and the positive externalities to give a sense of how responsible and how mutual or reciprocal is a company in its ecosystem. I hope I answered your question, Davina. Did I? Okay.
Now, the next question is from Tina Jaskolski. Tina, please unmute yourself.
Yes.
Hello, Martina.
Hello, how are you? Thanks for the presentation. I'm not an economist, but I was just wondering about things like triple bottom line accounting. It's kind of following on from the question that we just got. I mean, it all sounds very positive, what you're saying, but what about the trade-offs that might happen between the different types of capital? And maybe you have like a particular example, maybe that you could give us to make things a little bit more concrete.
Yeah. Well, actually, I don't think we should see it as trade-offs, but certainly as tensions. And we are not proposing here a triple bottom line for exactly that reason. So it's not, we don't have a book for finance, a book for people, and a book for the planet. We have one bottom line, which actually is a way to bring all the positive and negative externalities. It is a kind of a technical word, which an externality is what the company creates or destroys outside the boundaries of the firm. And so it's a way actually to bring things together. And same way, actually, companies have to invest in marketing, for instance, or in R&D, okay, in order to sustain and grow its business. Our argument is that in the future, a company will also have to invest in the ecosystem in which they operate in such a way that it would actually strengthen the relationship and the capital that actually exists in the ecosystem and from which it can get a return. The example I can give you, at Mars, we have a company called Royal Canin, which is a high-end pet food company. So it's all about selling pet food to cats and dogs. But that business is actually organized with a number of players. So we work with breeders, with veterinarians, and also with a number of pet shops, like specialized pet shops. These actually are the most important actors to grow the business. They are outside our business. We don't control them, right? But they are actually the prescriptor of the Royal Canin brand. And actually, by doing our exercise, we realized that the countries in which Royal Canin was overperforming is a country where the social capital and the human capital existing in this among the breeders, the veterinarians, the pet shop was the highest. So therefore, actually the countries which were underperforming are the countries which actually had very poor social and human capital across the most important stakeholders. So what we've done was very clear. We learned from the best performing countries, and we say, hey, how do you eventually create social and trust, social cohesion, a capacity for collective actions among breeders and veterinarians? That actually is a form of capability that you need to develop, and we learn from them, and actually we are applying this into different parts of the business. So that's very concrete. It's all about actually running like a training, for instance, offering training to specific breeders who don't know much about something that is important for their job. It's about bringing together the vets and the veterinarians. That's one example. Another example, for instance, is that when we were doing this, the work with this do-it-yourself type of shop in Europe, we realized actually there was one type of guy which was critically important. It was the small jobber actually who is helping the people to set up a new kitchen, to set up a new garderobe, for instance, at your home. And this guy actually is a critically important player that actually, if you don't have it in your ecosystem, your business goes down. But nobody thought about actually developing some sort of a social capital, human capital with these guys. And even like bringing them together, certifying them, opening a school for the jobbers that actually, when you call them, you know you can rely on certain level of quality. That's a very concrete example of how, as a business, you can actually invest in the social human capital of your ecosystem and impact positively, because essentially you give people jobs, you give people training, you put people together, you bring them into a community, but in return, you get also a higher level of financial return. Make sense, Martina? Where are you from?
Ashley?
You have a Polish name. Is it Polish or Jazz? Martina.
Tina, do you want to answer his question?
Okay, don't worry.
Okay. Yeah, I'm from Germany. It's just a Polish name.
Okay, very nice.
Okay.
Thank you, Martina.
Next question is from Ashley Tottelman. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, good evening. I'm calling in here from Utrecht, Netherlands. My video is going to be pretty poor, but I can share it here. Bruno, maybe you know the organization I work with. It's called IDH, the Sustainable Trade Initiative, which does a lot of work with Mars and other organizations. So I'm quite familiar with this kind of work. And if you can excuse, I'm going to read a bit of a question that I prepared in advance. So as a professional in agriculture supply chain sustainability, I can certainly attest to corporations consistently siloing their approaches to social, environmental responsibility, shareholder returns, and consumer branding and sales. So often we see social and environmental responsibility siloed in CSR and/or in project-based approaches to more impactful supply chain management and sourcing that are mostly grant-funded or sponsored for a limited time by specific buyers. Many argue a major element causing these silos and failure to significantly change the way business is done, especially in terms of supply management and sourcing, are threefold. One is the separation between the departments of sustainability, procurement, sales, and marketing. Another is associated KPIs for the aforementioned departments. Third is an incentive structure for executives and team members of those departments. While I agree that purpose needs to be more integrated into business, we can see and use examples of Ben & Jerry's or Tony's Chocolonely, for example, as maybe gold standards here. We often see purpose brands and businesses being built around their purpose, which is significantly different than how many corporations such as Mars were founded and grew. So I'm getting to the question, what concrete recommendations, Bruno, do you have around how to get corporations to transition holistically to a more purpose-driven approach that integrates the different corporate functions that I mentioned to enable really broad benefits across stakeholders rather than primarily stakeholders? And do you have any tips about the necessary incentives, tools, and data that would be useful to enable that transition, aside from what you mentioned here? And I did take note that many of the examples that you gave were on specialty areas. So I came from specialty coffee, and yes, specialty coffee can bring higher margins, but we're talking about very large, broad supply chains with large sourcing areas and lots of smallholder farmers, for example, that are contributing. So thank you in advance for a big question to tackle. And I really look forward to hearing your response.
Well, actually, maybe I should convince you to attend one of the courses we do in Oxford every year now. It's 1 week long, and actually we do it online now, and it's all about actually answering in detail some of your questions. But I will try to give you like the top level. First of all, we have to recognize that there has been 3 waves in what we call the responsibility of business. The first one was a wave of the charity model. That was a Bill Gates model, when essentially you have a guy making money one way and spending the other way. So he became the richest man of the world, and then he set up his foundation, and there is no relationship between the 2 activities. They are just, the only connection is at the level of the owner. Right? That's was actually eventually the charity model. And the charity model is good, but it's not scalable. And it is Mohamed Yunus, the father of micro-entrepreneurship, microfinance said that a charity dollar only has 1 life. A business dollar has multiple lives. So if you want scale, you need to move away from the charity model. The second wave was what you call the CSR. And it was a way for business to mitigate the risk, primarily for image purposes, but at the periphery of the business, never at the core. And it was all about actually trying to solve the biggest problem, like child labor, water pollution, etc. So it was more supply chain focused, mostly on the supply side, and as far as possible as a core business, right? So it was, in a sense, doing good, but at a cost. It's small scale. And doesn't mean actually that wasn't bad. That was bad. It was some very good initiatives, but none of them actually have scaled up. And even actually, I've been working with Danone for a number of years, and I've noticed what they've been doing. I mean, it's incredibly difficult to reach scale when it is not core to your business. And the third wave that we are witnessing now, and actually to some extent, the Economics of Mutuality is a methodology to align purpose and performance and behaviors, is essentially to leverage the power of business, because business is actually a formidable social construct to deliver performance. And actually, business existed before capitalism and will exist after capitalism. I mean, capitalism is a small parenthesis in the history of business. And if it is not in service of business, it will just disappear. So it's I mean, ideology usually don't last very long, okay? They come and go. So that's why I believe actually there is a chance to complete capitalism, it's actually by my argument, in order to convince companies that mobilizing resources beyond financial performance, beyond financial capital, in an ecosystem that is larger than just the legal boundaries of the firm, is a new frontier for value creation. And so the way we are, that's why actually we've been doing this transition out of Mars and to a foundation, and eventually also to a consultancy, is to convince companies one by one to say that, yeah, I mean, purpose is not just a nice thing to have. It is a source of innovation. It is a source of performance. And I'm amazed actually that I shared just before that the first companies that actually are coming to us are the private equity firms. So because they understand actually that the traditional model of just extracting value for shareholder is actually not optimum, even for the shareholder, actually. So it's a kind of ironical, actually. I mean, the model that we're proposing is more impactful in terms of on society and the planet, but is also more performant for the shareholder. So you see, it's a bit like, I mean, I know it's a very sensitive topic, but when I really want to make the argument and I want to be provocative, I say, listen, slavery was an excellent model from an economic perspective. It worked. Countries built empires based on slavery. Right? And eventually, when slavery was abandoned, it unleashed new forms of resources that actually ushered the period of growth that is actually unprecedented. I think we are at a similar point in time. Financial capitalism works, and actually companies have built empires based on this model. But the fact that it works doesn't mean it is not suboptimum. And there is actually a better model in terms of value creation, which is about understanding the different form of capital that exists in your ecosystem, understanding that reciprocal relationship is more powerful for value creation than power relationship, and that purpose is a strategic asset to organize and structure your ecosystem. So it is the systemic change that you are calling is coming from three pillars in my view. The first one is education. That's why I always respond yes when I'm invited to give a webinar. Okay, always, because I think education is key to grow a new generation of leaders. The second one is about actually bringing the finance people, the investors on board, in order, because finance has actually an incredible level of power in terms of transition. And the third level is to build coalition of businesses that actually sufficiently big to trigger a transformation. So these three pillars actually are, in my view, the transition that we are going through. Now, to respond to the second question is that, I mean, you know, one of the genius of Steve Jobs is that he never accepted to build divisions in his company. So working in silos is not conducive for performance. And actually, even the word division, it means you are divided. And divided means actually you are less strong. So I think, in a sense, this idea that you have like the corporate social responsibility, the corporate affairs, looking after, in a sense, the reputation of the company, while the rest of the business just makes profit, is the current model, but it's actually not optimum. And the way we work, actually, I don't work actually with corporate affairs. I don't work with corporate social responsibility team. I work with a finance team. I mean, my counterpart are the CEO and the finance team, and period, because they are the ones that are in charge of monitoring the value creation of the company. And what you're proposing is a value creation model. It's not a social or a responsibility. It happened to be socially responsible, but it's all about repositioning business as a social construct to mobilize resources and create more resources in such a way that there is a return on investment. The same way a shareholder is right to require a return from investment, the people and the planet also are right to request a return for what they're providing. And when you manage to demonstrate that when you are doing this kind of thinking, you are more powerful than just mono capitalism type of business model, then you're in business. I'd like to finish with an analogy. I mean, which I was looking at my notes a few weeks ago, and I remember when I was presenting this to Mars back in 2006. I said to them, well, listen, the 20th century has been actually dominated by three ideologies in economics. Marxism, which is all about remunerating people, labor, at the expense of the capital and the planet. Financial capitalism is all about remunerating shareholder and financial capital at the expense of people and the planet. And the ecology, which actually is a movement which started in during the Second World War, is all about remunerating the land, the planet, at the expense of the people and also of the capital. That's why most ecology movements are in the socialist, kind of leftist camp. And essentially you have like three dysfunctional ideologies that have shaped the world over the last 100 years. And actually, and the irony that like each one of them actually have something seducing, something actually appealing, right? And actually, being myself French, I mean, studied Marx to the extreme, right? I mean, that's why actually the Americans believe we are a bunch of socialists. We are not, but we understand socialism probably better than anybody else. But it was a half truth. But it is an ideology, and it collapsed. financial capitalism is also an ideology, and it will collapse if it's not completed. And ecology is also a form of ideology and will not sustain if it's not taking into account the three pillars of society, which are the land that provides, the people who transform and add value, and the capital, which is meant to bring liquidity into the system. Each of these pillars that are necessary to any form of value creation need to be remunerated in proportion to what they bring. If you don't, you are in an ideology, and eventually you are in a destructive mode of value creation. Make sense?
Merci. Yeah, merci.
Where are you from?
I'm American, but I live in the Netherlands, and I've spent many years in Rwanda and Ghana, as well as Lebanon.
Okay, all right. Well, thank you, Ashley. Very nice meeting you.
Take care.
I have two more questions. First, Farah. Farah, would you unmute, please?
Hi. Unfortunately, I won't be able to open my video because I have unstable internet connection. So my question is quite simple. Since you said that the capitalism proves maintainable economy and economic development, as well as the mixed economy that we live in, sanitary crisis, how do you imagine the new economic model that governments will apply to encourage the economics of mutuality in businesses? And do you think it will be robust to major crises?
So sorry, because the line was not was a bit broken. Could you just repeat the first part of your question? Because I understand the part about government, but did not understand the first part. Are you there? Or maybe if you can type your questions on the chat.
Sorry, I was just unable to unmute myself. The first part was that since capitalism proved its failure and also mixed economies proved its failure to maintain sustainable economic development in normal such as today. So how do you imagine the economic models in the future?
Okay,
to help sustain the economics of mutuality.
Okay, since capitalism proved its failure to maintain stable economic development, right? How do you imagine the new economic model that government will imply to encourage? Okay, and do you think it will be robust to major crises? Well, thank you for this question. Actually, it offers me the chance to finish on the macro level. You see, there is one thing that government can do. It is to force companies to report their performance in such a way, and also to tax results according to what they are, what kind of wealth they are creating. So I know there are some really interesting initiatives at the moment, both in the US and at the EU level, to force companies to report their of course their financial performance, but also their non-financial performance according to a number of criteria. And I think that by doing this, it will enforce companies to behave in a way that is more responsible, and will give also the means to government to levy taxes that actually could be tailored in such a way to encourage positive behaviors. It is a very long shot. I know the EU is working on this for like some years, and they have a fairly intentional agenda, especially on climate change. But it is a very long shot. So, but I think in a sense there is really no real options, because if they don't do that, there will be a rise of civil unrest, and we see that already happening in the even in the most advanced democracies. And also there will be a series of catastrophic events that actually will enforce companies to, government to act upon this. But it is a long shot. It will take time. But I think actually the movement is starting.
Okay, I have a last question I'm going to take from Benoit. Please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Ali, and thank you, Bruno. So just last quick one. I'm working in a finance department as a global commercial controller, and I was wondering regarding all the non-financial KPI you were mentioning in the way we should track the performance of an economic of mutuality strategy. Do you think that this kind of reporting and controlling way should be owned by finance as well?
Yes, the answer is yes. I mean, it really should be owned by finance, which means actually that the role of finance has to be expanded to other forms of capital, which are not only financial capital. That's for sure. And then you have two types of metrics that companies should monitor. The first type of metrics is metrics that help companies make decisions, which is called the leading indicator. And companies actually are doing this all the time. That's, you call it KPI or leading indicators. And the role of Economics of Mutuality is to equip companies with this kind of leading indicators that drive performance. And there is also another set of metrics that needs to be actually developed for reporting purposes. And there are already a number of metrics that exist. They are, broadly speaking, in the ESG space. And they are still under construction, a bit confused. But that's actually something that finance should also hold. So my answer is yes, finance should be the function that's control the value creation of the company across different forms of capital and beyond the boundaries of the firm. And also you need to make a split between leading indicators, which actually are meant to drive value creation, and reporting indicators, which are meant actually to communicate how you've been performing.
Thank you, Bruno. I just have one last comment. We always, when we talk about responsible behavior of corporations, of the form of a corporations, we tend to be very biased to the large corporations. There is a trend nowadays, but they tend to be like separate camps, talking about democratizing of the economy. And they're really talking about communities owning enterprises and owning assets and engaging in commercial activities. I mean, you could argue cooperatives is some form of a community-based enterprises. And interesting enough, when you talk about cooperatives, they are 100% capitalism product. The largest cooperatives are in countries like the US, Europe, and New Zealand, for example. New Zealand Dairy, which is Fonterra, is one of the largest dairy companies in the world. Land O'Lakes. Now, what do you think about this? I mean, is there a synergy across? I mean, we tend to sort of focus on the large ones and ignore the potential impact of the cooperatives, of the community-led organizations.
Well, I think it's it's not these equations. Because for instance, when we've been testing this model, Ali, we tested it initially in a very small size business. We started actually in Kenya. So of course it was part of a large corporation, but it was a relatively small size business, and I think, I mean, if I understand you well, the questions, I'd like to answer this way. I think it's easier for like a startup or small company to adopt the principle of the economics of mutuality because you have less things to unlearn or less things to undo, right? And eventually the turnaround and the prosperity or the growth could actually go quicker. For large corporation, the impact actually could be enormous, of course, but it takes much more time. So turning around a small company is easier and potentially quicker than turning around a large company. But the question is a bit artificial because since we are dealing at the level of an ecosystem, there is the large companies also operate with a network of smaller players. So the challenge is that the transformation needs to happen at the level of an ecosystem, not only at the individual company.
Yes. Some of those cooperations are, by the way, very large. Some of those cooperatives. I mean, when I talk about Amul in India, for example, this is huge. When I talk about Land O'Lake, when I talk about Ocean Spray, I mean, those are all cooperatives. But anyway, I see your point of view.
Like a Dragon in Spain, for instance. I mean, they're huge company, and actually, this model of co-op is incredibly powerful because it is resilient.
Absolutely, and it's very community driven. It's very stable because it drives from the community, drives the strength from the community.
Indeed.
Anyway, yes. It's been really been mind opening and interesting discussions, and I really thank you for joining our webinar and for the insightful and great discussions.
It was my honor.
On Wednesday, we're going to have. Please go ahead. Bruno.
It was my honor to address to you, and I wish you all a very good evening wherever you are.
Thank you. And I really recommend that you guys go to the website of the Economics of Mutuality. There are lots of interesting information there, lots of wealth of knowledge and materials. Now, the last thing I want to say before we conclude, on Wednesday, we're going to have Dr. Frank Aswani, who is the CEO of the Africa Venture Philanthropy Alliance, who will talk about the deficiency in the SDG finance and how venture philanthropy could play a role in reducing the gap in the SDG finance required for Africa. Wednesday, 7 o'clock. So stay tuned and see you soon. Again, I thank you, Bruno, for your contribution with us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Ali.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.